Hello everybody, this is Tip-Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about some custom Magic cards. I'm going to break down about 10 of them, tell you my thoughts on them, tell you what I think could be improved, how I think they'd be fun. A lot of the time when I'm talking about them, I will be talking about them in a Commander sense because, well, if you're going to use custom cards, they're going to be in Commander. But this video is not for people who are really going to use custom cards. Maybe it is, but generally custom cards are just really awesome to look at. There's some awesome design. It almost gives me some, like, hope for the future of, like, ooh, maybe something like this could actually come to the game and it would be a really fun card. So it's just kind of fun to look at some cards. It's almost like a little mini spoiler season that doesn't actually end up impacting anything. So yeah, why don't we jump right into this? Actually, quickly before we do, I just want to mention, if you guys want to see more awesome custom Magic the Gathering content, every single Sunday I post something related to Magic the Gathering content, whether it's my Magic the Marveling series where I'm combining Magic the Gathering and Marvel, or I'm doing little games where I'm like turning random words into mechanics and random cards into commanders. So yeah, you guys should check those out. I have a playlist on my channel of all my custom Magic videos. Either way, why don't we jump right into this? Starting off, we have the Gob Gobbler. Another thing quickly I want to mention is in the upper left, you can see which Reddit user created the cards. I in no way created any of the cards on today's list, and they were all found on r/custom magic. So I will also leave a link to that if you want to go check out some more awesome cards for yourself. So the Gob Gobbler is a 4-cost black and red legendary creature frog, 5/4 with menace. So a 4-cost 5/4 with menace is pretty good, but at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gob Gobbler unless you sacrifice a goblin. So this is very similar to the Gitrog monster in a sense, where at the beginning of your upkeep, you're going to have to keep sacrificing something, but you get a slightly beefier creature because of it. But he also says, goblin spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so you're going to be able to get a lot of goblins out, which means you're going to be more willing to sacrifice them. And then it also says, whenever a goblin you control dies, draw a card. So, in my opinion, this is a very clear, point to Gitrog monster, who's going to do basically the same abilities, minus the casting 1 less to cast. The Gitrog monster has, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a land or the Gitrog monster. Then it says, you can play an additional land each turn, which is essentially goblin spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And then whenever a goblin you control dies, draw a card. Whenever a land is put into your graveyard, draw a card. So it's very similar. I would say this one's much weaker just because the lands are so much more, kind of universally good. I mean, you can throw a bunch of lands in your deck and then throw in like an Ugin or some huge thing. Versus goblins, you're gonna need to be self-contained. You actually have to spend mana. And the biggest difference here is that whenever a goblin you control dies, it's very different than whenever a land goes to the graveyard. Because a land going to the graveyard can come from your hand. It can really do a lot of things. So this is clearly meant to be a kind of other Gitrog, but I think Gitrog Monster is more powerful. And that's good because Gitrog Monster is an insanely overpowered card. I think this one would be really fun to play. A little powerful, but would be definitely fun. Next we have these dual lands, and obviously I can't just show one of them, but here's kind of the idea. So they all enter the battlefield tapped, and when they enter the battlefield, you can add a colorless mana. And then you can tap it to add 1 of 2 colors. So they are purely better than a gate or a tap land, but they, what I like about this is, yes, they don't color fix the turn they come down, but they do ramp you the turn they come down. Or not ramp you, but they do, tap for mana the turn they come down, essentially. But you just don't get the colored mana. So I think this is a really, really interesting design, where, normally tap lands, you're playing a turn behind, but here you're just getting your color fixing a turn behind. You're getting the same amount of mana. You can play this on turn 3 and you'll have 3 mana that turn. So I actually think these would be really amazing, and right now they're uncommon. So if these were printed an uncommon in a big set, these would be really good lands in Commander. Now, it's all about getting your stuff on curve. This colorless mana, while it isn't colored, and that can be devastating, can help you cast things like Soul Ring. Imagine, turn 1, play one of these, you get your 1 colorless mana, play Soul Ring with it. Very, very awesome. I actually really like the design of these and think they'd be really fun. They're actually kind of close to really powerful, so I would not be surprised if these were printed at like a rare. Next we have the Traveler. It's a white, blue, black, red, green legendary creature rogue, 3/4. And it says planeswalkers you control have pay 0 loyalty, put a loyalty counter on this planeswalker for each +1/+1 counter on the Traveler. And it says whenever a planeswalker you control dies, put 2 +1/+1 counters on the Traveler. Okay, so here's first thing I just want to talk about a wording critique. Put the ability 0, put a loyalty counter. It would have to be 0, put a loyalty counter on this planeswalker for each +1/+1 counter on creatures you control named the Traveler, just because you know, it really can't keep track of it. I do get what they're trying to say here, just a little nitpick, but in terms of power level, because that's really what is more interesting to talk about, I think this one's really good. I mean, it's 5 colors, so it's definitely going in a Planeswalker deck. You know, if people are destroying your Planeswalker, they are getting bigger. But, you know, then you have a big creature. Are you trying to win with creatures? Or are you trying to win with planeswalkers? Generally, you don't really care too much about creatures if you're a planeswalker deck, but this really wants you to keep this one creature around, so that disincentivizes you to board wipe, which generally, you know, I think it has a little bit of conflictingness here, but I think it's a very interesting idea to give planeswalkers other abilities. I think this one honestly might be a little too powerful. Think about it. You're already wanting to run Proliferate in a planeswalker deck, and then you throw this on top of it, and now you're able to maybe have your planeswalkers ultimate the turn after they come out. Obviously Doubling Season can already pretty much do that, but you know, the deck that will want to run this card is already running cards that synergize with it. Proliferate, Doubling Season, all these cards are really going to be wanting to play with this, and you're already doing it. So I think it would be maybe a little too powerful. I think a lot of Atraxa decks may get upgraded into Traveler decks that have Atraxa in them. But yeah, this one is very powerful. Next we have Repossess. It's a 3-cost white instant, exile target permanent unless its controller pays 3. And I thought this one was really interesting in design. It's not flashy, it's not super crazy, but it's kind of a counterspell in a way. It's not like actually a counterspell, but it's worded very similar to a counterspell, which we really don't see a lot in removal form. It'd be like if black had a 1-cost black removal that said destroy target creature unless its controller pays 2. And that's very similar to counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. So I think it would be interesting to see maybe a cycle of cards where, you know, black is destroying a creature unless its controller pays some amount, and then white is maybe exiling a non-creature non-land, and then green is, you know, fighting, and red's dealing direct damage, and blue's countering, in this cool little cycle. So I think that could be really interesting, and I think that it's a space that I didn't really think about it, but it really hasn't been that explored that much, so it's pretty cool. Next we have the Akira Twins of Blood River. It's a Simic legendary creature, human warrior, 4/4, and when you may exert it as it attacks. When you do, draw a card. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if it is tapped, add colorless green blue. So what this is really supposed to be a reference to is Bounty of Luxa. And so Bounty of Luxa is essentially a card that is very complicated when you read it, but essentially what it does is on one turn it'll give you 3 mana, on the next turn it'll draw you a card, then you'll add 3 mana, then you'll draw a card, and it just flip-flops every turn. And this kind of does the same thing, and I just thought this was really genius. So when it attacks, you can exert it, and if you do, you're going to draw a card. So that's the drawing card of Bounty of Luxa. Then at your next upkeep, because it is going to be tapped, you can, because it was exerted, it won't untap during your next upkeep. You add the mana, which then means the next turn it will be untapped, which means you won't add the mana and you can draw a card. Now, it's worse than Bounty of Luxa. It's easier to kill. If it's not safe to swing, it, you know, dies. But I just really thought the design was interesting, and it is better in the fact that it can sit in the command zone. Now, do I really think it's worth it? No, but I think there are a lot of cool things you can do with this. For instance, you can give it tap abilities or untap abilities to be able to maybe get both of them on your turn. So there are definitely advantages to both ways. You know, with Bounty of Luxa, you are limited. It's either one or the other. Yes, you can manipulate it a little bit, but there's no way you're getting both. So unless you're like copying triggered abilities and then also changing counters in between those copies and whatever, but this could be really easily manipulated. Equip it with something that lets it tap to deal 1 damage. Boom. Now you can tap it and just add 3 mana every turn, and it's a really big mana creature. Yeah, I think this would be a really fun commander to find little interactions with. I don't think it'd be the most powerful, but I think it'd be pretty fun. Next we have Beacon of the False God. So this is very similar to Temple of the False God, at least in naming. Beacon of the False God enters the battlefield tapped, so already worse. But as long as you control 5 or more lands, activated abilities of lands you control cost 1 less to activate. And then you can pay 1, tap, and add colorless. Now this is very similar to Temple of the False Gods. Temple of the False Gods is a land that enters battlefield untapped, but taps to add 2 colorless mana, only if you control 5 or more lands. What I hate about that is that it can just sit there doing nothing. So this is, in my opinion, both upgraded and downgraded. And honestly, I would not be surprised if something similar to this is printed without the entering tapped. So the idea here is that you can kind of activate it as a colorless signet until you have 5 or more lands, in which case this just turns into Temple of the False Gods. So, you get rid of, the ability to make things cost less to activate on lands, then override its 1 cost to add 2. Overall, I think it's a really interesting design that gives Temple of the False Gods, style cards a little bit of play early on. Now, my issue is it enters the battlefield tapped, so then say you're playing it like turn 3, you're not playing it turn 1. Turn 2, I guess you could play it turn 1. It kind of feels bad to play because it is not that super efficient either, because you're probably turning 1 colored mana into 2 colorless. So there are a lot of things that I think are kind of wrong with this design. That's why I don't like Temple of the False Gods, but I think it's interesting and a better way to do a Temple of the False Gods kind of card. Now, this may be too powerful, but I think it is more satisfying to the player, and it doesn't be like, oh, well, I need a land, and this wasn't the land I needed. Next, we have Ridway Unburied. It's a 1 red, green, white legendary creature, human shaman 1/3. When worms and hellions in your library while you're searching your library, you may cast this card from your library, and it says worm and hellion spells you cost 2 less to play. I would say to cast would be better wording, but either way, the idea here is when you can search your library, you can actually just start casting spells from your deck, and this is wildly, unfair and way too overpowered. First off, any shapeshifter can just be cast, and then because things are going to cost 2 less to cast, and they didn't limit it to, get rid of things, you can essentially just play like any 2 cost colorless or less shapeshifters just for free out of your library, which there are some. And then you add in the fact worms and hellions are generally pretty expensive, and then you also have to have some effect that makes you search your library, but things like fetch lands are searching your library technically. So yeah, I think first off, this would be a rules nightmare, and it is a little powerful. I think it's a really interesting idea, but I think Ridway would have to cost a little bit more to really get this to work. Now, because obviously of the creature types, it may be a little bit more acceptable because they are so expensive, but I think that it's a little much. Either way, I enjoy the design, it's just a little powerful. Next, we have Draw Conclusions. It's a 1-cost blue sorcery, draw a card, and then investigate. This is a really kind of simple card compared to some of the ones we looked at, but it's kind of drawing you 2 cards for 1. It's getting you an artifact. I actually think this is a really good card and would see a lot of play if it was printed. Think about it. Any deck that wants artifacts, any deck that wants tokens, even just any deck that wants to draw lots of cards is going to want this. It's essentially pay 1 mana, draw 2 cards kind of slowly. You do end up needing to pay 3 mana in the end, but this is almost purely a better divination because you can split your mana over 2 turns. Think about it, divination, you're paying 2 and a blue to draw 2 cards. This one's drawing you a card right away and then letting you pay that 2 colorless mana anytime later, and it counts as an artifact while it's on the battlefield. So I actually think this card's really awesome, and at first you might be like, oh, that's kind of boring, but I think it has some really awesome implications. Next, we have Obsidat Inflation. It's white, black, legendary enchantment. For each 1 in a cost, that player may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana. So it's very similar to, I'm forgetting his name, Crick, son of Yarick, who basically turns all black mana into Phyrexian mana. But this is turning all generic mana into Phyrexian mana. And then, but the issue is the thing is it affects your opponents too. But it says whenever your opponent pays life, you may gain that much life. So now your opponents are kind of healing you by casting their spells. Now, I think this is an insane card. Think about it. Turn 4, pop it down. It is very hard to play. It's very color mana intensive. But turn 4, pop this down, and then you can cast your Emrakul for 26 life. So yeah, I do think this card's broken. I think that maybe they could have found a better, you know, a way to balance it a little bit more, but it does give it to your opponents. Your opponent can do something crazy with it too, but generally, they're not going to be able to take as much advantage of it. On top of that, the card already gives you advantage for it. So I think this would have been better if it didn't give you the whenever an opponent pays life thing. I think this card would be much more appropriate if the way to benefit off of giving your opponents this ability is that your deck is built to take advantage of this card. That would make a lot more sense than saying, oh yeah, this card just does everything for you. I'm not saying I don't like the design. I think it could be interesting, but again, it just feels a little too powerful. And that is a very common theme today, is that a lot of these cards just feel powerful. So, let's move on. Next, we have Burning Cathedral, and I would assume this would be a, you know, cycle, but it's a land, tap, add white or red, and whenever it or another land enters the battlefield under your control, you lose 1 life. So, yeah, this one's kind of interesting. It doesn't make you lose life when it enters the battlefield. It doesn't let you pay life to have it enter the battlefield tapped. It doesn't make you lose life when you add mana. It makes you lose life when the land's ETB. So, I don't know how good this is. I think that in a competitive format where you really don't care too much about your life total because both players are just going to win with combos, this is probably an insane card. But if we're looking at a more casual EDH kind of, you know, thing, I think that, you know, punishing people and disencouraging people to play lands, like, I think at a point it becomes better than something like Yavimaya Coast, which is going to tap to, you know, you pay a life to add mana. But the thing is, you know, you may not need with pain lands, you have to, you know, you don't have to use that mana. Versus with Burning Cathedral, every time you're playing a land, you are getting hit. You can't just avoid tapping that land. So I think it is very interesting. I think it's not as powerful as it may seem immediately, but it's either going to be super hyper powerful or dead, and I think it could be both, you know, dead to casual players and super powerful to CEDH players. Either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I have a playlist full of custom Magic videos and one just based around my Magic the Marveling series, which is a lot of fun. So you guys should check those out. I will see you guys in the next one.